this is a huge topic to cover, so I just wanted to kind of level set with you by starting with the role of nature and net zero and sort of how that has evolved 6 months, a year, 5 years. I mean, you've been in this game for a long time.
Yeah, net zero. Actually, a lot of people don't know, I helped sort of get the net zero, some of those original white papers. I worked on that way before the Paris Agreement. So it's been, if you hear the fatigue in my voice, that was a long time. So, the good news is what net zero means is way more clear, just across the board. And, the first, a lot of the work we did at One Earth was to really get clarity on the energy side. What do we have to do? And, back then, even 5 years ago, it's we could just decarbonize really fast and do 1.5 C. If you guys know the climate goal of the Paris Agreement to keep temperatures to 1.5 C. But that quickly has become clear that it's even, we've run this model. It's called the One Earth Climate Model, used by Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, a bunch of others, because it's a very detailed, deep decarbonization model of every piece of the global economy, how you do that, and how fast you can do that. And even if you pedal to the metal, you need pedal to the metal on nature. We found you really need something like 450 billion tons of removing of legacy carbon out of the atmosphere in addition to this rapid decarbonization. And so after we discovered that, which was the first version of the One Earth Climate Model, second version came out last year, we really dove into specifically what is the technical potential of nature restoration. So that's removing carbon dioxide, and so we have 5 major pathways that we funded, which are sort of the tree-based pathways, and it's the first global spatial model of those. And we found something like 370-ish gigatons, so billion tons of removal, and that's mostly through reforestation, letting forests heal, better logging, and then some planting on croplands and pasture land. So all that together still doesn't get us to all the nature removal we need. And then there's another chunk of really interesting pathways, there's some agricultural pathways and some coastal restoration pathways. But yeah, we need all of it. It's essential to determine net zero. Then there's the question of, I could let you ask me other questions, but the question of then what's the role of corporate and private sector in that, which is also a whole very interesting topic.
Yes, and one that we will certainly get to, as most of our audience here are coming from that side. But I do want to kind of ask you, when you think about sort of the evolution of this, nature transition almost, how do you compare that to the energy transition itself? What is its role? Is there something that we can learn from the energy transition to apply to the nature transition?
Yeah, I know, it's such a good question. Well, I always like to say there's sort of two wings of the bird, so theoretically, but in terms of practically, I was one of those people that was advocating for 100% renewables when really people thought we were crazy. And this was not that long ago, we're talking 12, 15 years ago. And even, I was just looking back, even Greenpeace around the Copenhagen Agreement, do people remember Copenhagen? So this was the big, Obama went to that one, and many people called it a failure in the press, but actually it advanced some really important stuff. But Greenpeace's model was 80% renewables. No one wanted to say we could totally decarbonize things. But now, everyone and their grandmother is 100% renewable models. Al Jaber, the COP president, who's also CEO of one of the world's largest oil and gas companies, said we're going to triple renewables by 2030, which is very aggressive, the most aggressive target in any COP, and it's kind of closely aligned actually with our model. But yeah, so we've come on this journey from people laughing us out of the room to now everyone and their grandmother is on this 100% transition. So with nature, it's and the energy transition is inherently technical and an engineering matter, right? So it's kind of easy to measure. The nature, we're sort of back 15 years now. And like what we see as a need is to really invest in the science and the technical aspects of how we work with nature to remove this legacy carbon. And that in my mind, it's like we have to just make that investment. Like and so that's some of what we do. But there's other pieces to talk about that. I mean, there is a kind of pushback against it, but there was a pushback against renewables, So it's like, and here we are. So it's like, we just have to accelerate this. So we're going to have to work out the technicalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of bouncing off of your earlier point of, other people getting involved in nature projects, I'm curious, sort of to our audience here, what are some of the biggest benefits that companies or investors can reap when getting involved in restoration? What are some of the risks that they might face from putting their resources into these kinds of projects?
Yeah, well, the biggest benefit is we can have a planet to live on.
That's a pretty strong argument.
Like
Can't disagree with that.
It would be nice to have a planet that we can actually run a business on.
Yeah, you can run your business on the planet. See, it's really that simple.
It's that simple. If only it were that simple. Yeah, I mean, so with net zero, with companies now, because of this SBTI, do people know what that is? Science-Based Targets Initiative. So we finally got like clarity on what does net zero mean. Part of, and I want to just talk about greenwashing and the John Oliver moment in a second, but part of all the pushback against corporates being involved in credits, let's say nature credits, offsets, they're different things, but is because we're really there's this fear of greenwashing, and it's like it's actually you can do it wrong, and so there's a trepidation. But on the other hand, now we have thousands. I think it's 5,000. I don't know how the current count of companies that have signed on to net zero. So we know net zero means almost zero by 2050. Let's just like if everyone wants to talk, your aunt or uncle asks you what the hell does it mean? It means we're almost going to take out all the emissions by 2050, and then you can offset that extra little bit. But on your journey to 2050, it's great for a company to be transparent and tell the story about its milestones to that journey, and how it is compensating or offsetting for the residual emissions that it can't yet eliminate. So telling that story for a corporate, to me, is like, if you want to reach Gen Z consumers especially, you got to tell that story. And that's, to me, a big positive. If you can be open and transparent, like we are going to follow like the latest protocols, methodologies. We're on this journey. We're not going to be perfect, but we're going to really do our best. So in the restoration side of it, we have a lot of science to show that it works. Yes, it can fail. And that's partially because we never we haven't scaled that restoration to the level we need to. But we know that it works, and actually it can compensate for emissions. And it's fairly permanent. Like people say trees aren't permanent, that's true, but there's forests in California that have withstood hundreds, if not thousands of fires and are still there 12,000 years later. So forests actually are quite permanent. And telling that story about how there's the storytelling dimension too, in addition to the carbon dimension of your journey to net zero, and talking about how you're investing in the planet and the ecosystems and doing that in a credible way. I mean, I think that's the biggest benefit, and you can be really transparent about your full net zero journey.
Yeah, and we're starting to see things like green hushing, where maybe people are sort of pulling back on telling those stories, but it is a journey for everyone, and nobody is perfect right off the bat. And I think what you're kind of getting at, right, is the idea of trust, credibility, reliability, which brings me to nature credits. You touched on it a little bit before, but I think the burning question on a lot of our minds is how can those markets, address that reliability question, and how can they kind of harness any momentum coming out of the Montreal COP?
Yeah, so has everyone heard about nature credits? I'm just like, everyone It's now old news, right? Because even a year ago, people would be like, wait, what? Like, is that a carbon credit?
But do they work, Karl? That's what we want to know.
Well, they don't, I'm not going to say they don't exist, but they do exist in some places. And there's actually even, you have to take off, there's some compliance markets emerging, like in Australia, where there's a nature offset. So we have to pull that to the side because that's different. But so the foundational idea here is that in the climate agreement, we have to remove all this legacy carbon. So that's done through restoration. That is additional. We're taking degraded lands that aren't being used and we're putting nature back, sucking carbon up. On the biodiversity convention side, we have 30 by 30 target. So everyone knows this. Like we have, and actually that was, a lot of people don't know that was our paper.
Oh.
We were the first, we were the first peer-reviewed paper. Our team, a group of scientists, and I'm co-author on that paper, introducing 30 by 30 as a milestone target. So we got that. So we now know 30% of the planet. That is going to cost a ton of money. And there's wildly diverging estimates. We use about $500 million a year. So like think about the climate fund, the $100 billion climate fund on the climate side. We still haven't filled that. And we have been at that for 12 years. We need $500 billion for nature. So we are not, governments are pledging, that's great. We have this incredible momentum, but we're just not going to get that amount of money without the private sector coming in. And now with the Montreal Protocol, Montreal Kunming Agreement, we have the private sector coming in like they did around Paris. Like, okay, we want to help. Like, and I've talked to a lot of the very, very large corporate actors, and they're super sincere and interested in doing this. And some of them have been nature philanthropy for a long time, right? But they didn't sort of have a framework, a global UN framework to kind of dock that into. So now they do. So because credits is like what we use on the climate side, now everyone's kind of using and moving that language over into the biodiversity side. I have to say I was really, really skeptical for a very long time about it. Because it's like, what could go wrong? Like we had 20 years to do carbon credits and we still don't have that one right yet. The market isn't really fully a market. But I have been won over recently, yeah. I will say. And I just think because the urgency of the problem is so significant that we just have to figure out a way to do these credits. So I don't want to bore everybody while they're eating, but there's all sorts of interesting ideas about how to do credits, which might be interesting to people. I don't know if there, should I go into that a little bit? Or?
Well, we're running out of time, so I did want to see if we have any audience questions. Otherwise, we'll just let Karl go off on nature credits.
I can keep blabbing.
No, not at all. Anyone? Who wants to hear more of Karl on nature credits? All right, there we go. General
actually,
consensus.
Not that many hands. They're like, please shut up. No, it's actually.
We do have a question. Sure.
So I was talking about carbon credits with a professor at Bloomberg, and her view was that the whole question of credits can't really work unless there's a global industry. What are your thoughts on that? Like a really hard global, well-regulated industry.
I mean, to get to the massive scale that we need, she's probably right. But, and yeah, maybe different people mean different things by register or kind of type of compliance regulation. But the thing is, regulations are coming, and that's sort of also part of that answer you were asking, why will corporates do this? I mean, we're going to see ESG greenwashing regs coming. There's some on the Hill right now. So it's like at least the disclosure piece is going to be regulated soon. And so I think we can do a whole lot of it without that. And on the carbon credit side, and nature credits are so new, and I think they're similar, but we have a big opportunity right now. So just the two schools of thought, if people don't know, there's like, let's bundle them with carbon. So let's create a hybrid carbon or a biocarbon or biodiversity uplift type credit. And the other people are like, we don't want anything to do with the markets, the carbon credits. We want our own fresh, shiny, new kind of credits. And then on that group, there's two, and it's kind of important because it does get into technology, which I know a lot of people want to talk about. But there's one school which is like, okay, we have to create, like with the carbon market, we had one single, relatively easy to measure unit, which was a a ton of carbon dioxide. Nature is dazzlingly more complex than this, right? Orders of magnitude. And so there's this uplift idea, which is essentially like, well, could we use AI, could we use supercomputers to like mash together all these different kinds of indicators and bundle them into something equivalent to a unit of uplift? The other group is like, no, that's way too complicated. We need to move now. That's going to take too long to figure out. And let's just, if a company wants to protect a standing forest that can't access finance in the carbon markets, right? Because it's there. Like, that's the problem, is like most of nature can't access the carbon markets. But a company wants to protect that acre, or say quarter acre, whatever the unit is, or a tenth of a hectare, then they should be able to fund that and be recognized for it. And therein lie a market, right? And that one, I think, is the one a lot of us are leaning to, because the unit becomes, did the practices happen or not? So actually, our unit of measurement is a bit different. Yeah, I don't know if that was too much.
No, never too much. And everybody, Karl's going to be sitting right over there. Fortunately, we do have to get to our next group of speakers, but if you want to catch up with him after networking, I'm personally going to have to save my question on how it was working with Leonardo DiCaprio until the end, off stage. So we'll get to that later.